On top of the Odenwald Mountains of northern Germany lies a wild and beautiful area of land. It is situated near the junction of the Main and the Rhine rivers. The castle of the Baron von Landshort stood there many years ago. The castle is now in ruins and almost buried among dark old mountain trees. High above the castle, the walls of an observation tower, once used to keep watch over the surrounding country, still stand. The Baron was a member of the great family of Katzenelnbogen. He had been handed down the remains of the estate and all the family pride that came with the property. He did not have a son to whom he could hand down the castle and land. Many of the family possessions had been lost in the constant fighting of his ancient relatives. However, the Baron still tried to keep up some show of their former elegant way of life. The times were peaceful, and the German nobles in general had abandoned the uncomfortable old castles. Most had built more convenient houses in the valleys. The Baron still remained in his castle, proud of his ancient history, but keeping alive all the old family quarrels. In this way, he was still on bad terms with some of his nearest neighbors because of arguments that had happened hundreds of years earlier. The Baron only had one child, but as so often happens where there are no other children, nature makes up for the lack by creating a single, brilliant human being. This is how it was with the daughter of the Baron. All the people in the town, and even people around the country, assured her father that his daughter was the most beautiful person in Germany. Who would know better than they? As well as having beauty, the daughter had been brought up with great care under the protection of two single aunts. The aunts had spent several years of their early lives at one of the little German courts. This experience had given them all the necessary knowledge for the education of a fine lady. Under their instructions, their niece became a young woman with many wonderful gifts. By the time she was 18, she could sew perfectly. She sewed pictures of many religious figures on material with such skill that the faces of the people showed real emotions. She could read well and had worked her way through several religious stories and almost all the brave adventures of the heroes of national German poetry. She had even made considerable progress in writing and could sign her aunts could read it without glasses. She was very particularly good at making pretty but useless little gifts of all kinds. She was even able to do all the most difficult modern dance steps and played a number of tunes on the guitar. She could play every love song of the early German poets by heart. Her aunts, having been very lively when they were young, made the rules of behavior very strict for their niece. It is an interesting fact that there is no person so wise and well-behaved as one who has been very wild herself as a young person. The niece was rarely allowed out of the aunt's sight. She was never allowed outside the castle without company. She had constant lectures on how to behave well and obey everyone. As for men, she was taught to keep them at a distance and certainly not trust anyone in particular. So strict were the aunts about this that, unless at the most handsome man in the world, the good effects of the strict rules were quite obvious, the young lady was an example of perfect behavior and duty. While other girls were amusing themselves out in the world, she was developing into a lovely woman under the protection of the careful aunts. She was like a beautiful rose growing between two sharp points. Her aunts looked at her with pride and joy and said, "Although all the other young ladies in the world might do wrong, thank heaven nothing like that could happen to the daughter of the Baron of Katzenelnbogen." There was a constant stream of visitors to the castle. Circumstances had given him a huge number of poor relations. The relations all loved him and took every opportunity to arrive in large numbers and bring pleasure to the castle. All family festivals were celebrated by these happy people at the Baron's expense. After they had eaten his good food and drank huge quantities of wine, they would declare that there was nothing on earth as enjoyable as these family dinners. The Baron, although a small man, had a very generous heart. It gave him a feeling of great satisfaction to think he was the top man in his little world. He loved to tell long stories about the severe, old relatives whose pictures looked down from the castle walls. He always found his guests to be a good audience. He believed in, and was very interested in, the ghost stories that were told in every village in Germany. His guests had even more faith than the Baron in the ghost stories, and listened to every strange account with surprise and wonder. They never ceased to be amazed, even though they had heard the stories over and over before. This is how the Baron von Landshort, the head of his castle and the king of his little region, lived. He was quite sure that he was the smartest man of the age,